Hey everyone, this is an obituary for Hal Draper by Ernie Haberkern. I'm getting this from againstthecurrent.org. On January 26, 1990, Hal Draper, the leading international spokesman for the Third Camp Socialist position and an active participant in and theoretician of the revolutionary socialist movement for over 50 years, died at the age of 75 in Berkeley, California. Hal Draper first rose to prominence in the socialist movement in the 1930s. As national organizer of the Young People's Socialist League, Draper led the left wing of the student strike against war. Draper outlined the history of the movement in his contribution to a collection of essays called As We Saw the 30s. The target of these student demonstrations, unprecedented in the United States, was not only, or even primarily, the impending war in Europe. It was not an isolationist movement mainly concerned with keeping the country out of, quote, foreign wars, as liberal historians continue to claim. The demonstrations were aimed at the chauvinism, incipient fascism, and increasing militarism which are poisoning American political life as the Roosevelt administration prepared the American people for imperialist war. While the Communist Party and the Communist Party's liberal sympathizers swung from sectarian denunciations of Roosevelt as a fascist to the opposite extreme, denouncing Roosevelt's opponents and even tepid critics as the fascists, the left wing of the Socialist Party, especially the youth, who were themselves prospective cannon fodder, became even more principled opponents of Roosevelt's foreign and domestic policy. It was in the student anti-war movement that Hal Draper met his future wife of 44 years, Annie Classic, who was also a prominent socialist activist and trade union militant. She died early in 1973. In 1934, the American supporters of Leon Trotsky, led by men like James Buchanan, Max Shachtman, and Albert Goldman, the Socialist Party, they provided the left wing with an intellectual and political leadership it had lacked since the 1920s. Hal Draper became an active supporter and leader of the left wing that formed around these people. In 1938, in what Draper felt was a hasty and ill-advised move, Trotsky supporters, in de facto collaboration with the right-wing leadership of the Socialist Party, split the party and formed their own organization, soon to be called the Socialist Workers' Party. Faced with the choice of supporting a revolutionary leadership he thought mistaken and remaining with a party dominated by a right wing that was rapidly becoming an appendage to the Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party, Hal Draper became a charter member of the Socialist Workers' Party. Before a year was up, the Hitler-Stalin pact threw the Socialist Workers' Party, the labor and socialist movements, and the diplomatic and foreign policy of the major powers into a tailspin. Inside the Trotskyist movement and its periphery on the left of the socialist movement, the pact provoked a crisis. Already in 1937, as Trotsky was preparing to found the Fourth International, there was growing opposition to support of the Soviet Union. Prominent spokesmen for this point of view were James Burnham and Joseph Carter in the United States and Yvonne Clepeau in France. In response to the crisis of the Hitler-Stalin pact, Joseph Carter took the position that Russia had become a new class society, neither socialist nor capitalist, which was an enemy of both the bourgeoisie and the working class. In the course of the discussions around this issue, Hal Draper became convinced by Carter's arguments. Draper drafted the 1941 resolution of the Carter position and based his political analysis of contemporary politics on that position for the rest of his life. Footnote: there is a myth that the Italian crank Bruno Rizzi is responsible for this theory. See my article in Telos, number 66, for a discussion of this particular piece of disinformation. End footnote. New section, organizer and writer. As a member of the newly formed Workers' Party, formed from the 1940 split in the Socialist Workers' Party, Draper spent the war years organizing opposition to the authoritarian and anti-labor policies of the wartime administration. Draper and his comrades agitated against the internment of Japanese Americans, the perpetuation and extension of Jim Crow legislation and practice in the military and in civilian life, and the regimentation of labor through the No Strike Pledge. Their newspaper and theoretical journal, Labor Action and The New International, detailed the reactionary policies of American and Russian imperialism as they maneuvered for position in the post-war world, cynically appealing to the horror and revulsion provoked by fascist and Nazi war crimes, while they assimilated the methods and techniques of fascism themselves. During this period, Hal and Ann Draper were employed in the shipyards in the Los Angeles area. They helped organize and lead the ultimately successful wildcat strikes that forced the union leadership, management, and the government to deal with the workers' trade union demands that had been sacrificed on the altar of, quote, wartime emergency. In 1948, Hal Draper became editor of the theoretical journal New International. In 1949, Draper left that position to become the editor of the paper Labor Action, which, under his editorship, changed from an agitational newspaper to one emphasizing socialist education and political analysis. In that same year, he authored the Resolution on Capitalism, Stalinism, and the Struggle for the World, which used the position Carter had proposed in 1940 as the basis for a political perspective on the development of the post-war world. In this document, Draper applied the theory of, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, which is the name Carter gave to the new system, not only to Russia. In this document, Draper applied the theory of, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, the name which Carter gave to the new system not only in Russia, its satellites in China, but to the first glimmerings of non-Stalinist bureaucratic tendencies in capitalism and in liberal and social democratic ideology and practice. Throughout the 50s, Labor Action, published by the Independent Socialist League, as the Workers' Party was now called, remained a respected, knowledgeable, and principled opponent of American imperialism as the authoritarian tendencies of the Roosevelt administration flowered in the Cold War period. In its reportage and analysis of McCarthyism, the American invasion of Korea, and the growing intervention in Vietnam, Labor Action, unlike many on the left, did not find it necessary to apologize for the Stalinist movements that so often benefited from American blunders and atrocities in this period. Footnote: a collection of Draper's writings on this subject is available from the Independent Socialist Press. It has a mail order address. This article's from 1990. After the majority of the Independent Socialist League dissolved into the Socialist Party in 1958, a move Hal Draper opposed as an attempt to bury Third Camp Socialism in a party moving in a pro-West direction. The Drapers spent a year traveling in Europe on a sort of political grand tour, meeting with leaders and activists of various tendencies in the socialist movement. They moved to Berkeley, California the next year, at a time when the student movement that was to give birth to the free speech movement and the new left of the 60s is already underway. Hal and Ann Draper were prominent advisors and leaders of the left wing of the Socialist Party in the early 60s, at a time when that party enjoyed an Indian summer of activity. Its members exercised considerable influence in the civil rights and peace movements. The Socialist Party enjoyed a brief monopoly position on the left, since the Communist Party and the Communist Party's periphery were in complete disarray following Khrushchev's revelations and the suppression of the rising of the Hungarian working class against Stalinism. New section. A new movement. By 1964, the political and organizational ties of the right wing of the Socialist Party, under the leadership of Michael Harrington and Bayard Rustin, to the Democratic Party, had damaged the SF. I forget what SF means. Forget. Anyway, maybe it's supposed to be the SP. I don't know. By 1964, the political and organizational ties of the right wing of the Socialist Party, under the leadership of Michael Harrington and Bayard Rustin, to the Democratic Party, had damaged the Socialist Party's reputation and strained its relations with the militants, and even the not-so-militants, in the civil rights and peace movements. The betrayal of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegation at the Democratic Convention of 1964 by these same leaders made continued membership in the same political party with them impossible for many socialists. In the early fall of 1964, the left wing of the Socialist Party in Berkeley constituted itself as the Independent Socialist Club, just in time for the free speech movement. It is difficult to imagine the outrage provoked by the free speech movement in these post-Vietnam War days. Shouldn't that be... It's difficult to imagine the outrage provoked by the free speech movement in these post-Vietnam War days. Not only conservative politicians and campus administrators, but prominent liberal politicians and columnists denounced the students, as did the student government and the student newspaper, the Daily Californian. (The only lib-lab type who backed the students was George Hardy of the Service Employees. He was the exception that proved the rule. His local had tried to organize dormitory workers on the campus the year before and had been royally shafted by the liberal industrial relations expert who was president of the university, a man named Clark Kerr. End parenthesis. Hal Draper was one of the few from the generation of the 30s who spoke out in defense of the students. Draper's pamphlet, The Mind of Clark Kerr, published by the Independent Socialist Club, articulated the students' deeply felt but unthought-out suspicions of this liberal administrator who was doing the dirty work of conservative opponents of civil rights. Draper's book, Berkeley, The New Student Revolt, published later that year, was the first serious attempt at a critical analysis of the New Left. Hal and Ann Draper continued to be active spokespersons for the left in the 1960s, especially in the growing anti-war movements in the unions. In the growing anti-war movement in the unions. They were particularly active in the Labor Assembly for Peace. Ann Draper was one of the founders of this first organized attempt to swing labor away from the Meany line. As the New Left went into its precipitous decline in the late 60s, Hal Draper turned to the theoretical work which he felt was necessary to reorient an increasingly disoriented movement. His 4-volume study of Marxist political thought, Karl Marx's Theory of Revolution, published with Monthly Review Press, has had an important impact on serious socialist scholars. In 1981, Hal Draper founded the Center for Socialist History, a nonprofit organization dedicated to research and study on the origins and history of the socialist movement by and for socialists who want to understand their movement and its role in history and help shape its development in the future. Recent events in Eastern Europe, even more than the collapse of the New Left, demonstrate the need to rethink the socialist past as a prerequisite for and necessary part of effective revolutionary action. Thanks for listening.